Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism. Your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you are tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mormon Newscast. It's Monday, 6 p.m. on June 9th. I'm Rebecca Bibliotheca, and I'm going to be doing most of the talking tonight because RFM and Bill Reel have just come off a 2-hour episode with Spencer Anderson, accounting professor, talking about some breaking news that we're going to mention tonight. But I want to say at the top, after the newscast is over, this is just going to wet your whistle, to use an antiquated phrase. You need to go back, if you haven't, and watch the episode that just aired prior to this about the LDS Church possible tax evasion. How do you guys both feel, RFM, then Bill? That was an incredible episode. I was telling RFM before the show, I had meant to just kind of like pop in, listen for a minute, had other stuff to do. I was riveted the entire time. You stole 2 hours of my afternoon.
And we're not giving it back.
I don't want it back. It was incredible.
I've got a lot more I want to say, so I'm glad we're covering it again some more tonight at the newscast. So
exactly.
I'll hit a couple of highlights as my story, and I'll definitely do the same as you, Rebecca, and refer anybody who wants to know more. First off, to the Widows Might Report at thewidowsmightreport.org or widowsmightreport.org with their brand new, as of yesterday, 82-page report on allegations where it looks an awful lot like the church has actually been engaged in tax fraud on the U.S. government.
Yep, it's going to be great. So I think let's pull up the slides. I think we have quite a number of stories, and some of them do include breaking news, including what we were just talking about. So let's see, here we go. And I will go through the topics. All right, here we go. We're going to be talking about, as RFM and Bill mentioned, breaking news, the LDS Church alleged to have broken the IRS tax code. We're also going to be mentioning Fairview files a lawsuit in district court. This is in addition to the appeal we talked about last time. They're very litigious. We're going to be talking about where is religion disappearing the fastest, and that means geographically where. This will be a really interesting story by Bill. LGBTQ positive statement removed from the church website. There's a question mark because we're not quite sure what happened. I'll take that one. What should you do when a loved one leaves the church? That's another story that Bill is going to be covering. I'm sure we all would like to know what they think they should do.
Throw a party?
I don't know. We'll see what Bill has to say. And then Russia bans BYU. This is kind of a big story that came out last weekend, but why is what we're going to talk about. And then finally, a Syracuse temple dedication stealth update. That's right. I put on my stealth disguise, and we're going to have some information on that. So before we go to RFM with the story about the tax evasion, I wanted to remind everybody that, what do you guys think? Does June 9th, does that date sound familiar to either of you? No, not at all.
It would not have rung any bells to me.
It wouldn't have. Isn't that funny? June 9th is the anniversary, 47 years since they lifted the priesthood ban. Isn't that interesting? I was 12 years old at the time. And I remember, being in conference when everybody had to vote. But I thought this was kind of unusual. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Facebook page, Caribbean, specific to that area, I guess, put out the statement of commemoration, to remind everybody what was happening. But to me, what was very interesting is the picture that they used. Do either of you recognize that picture? That event?
Bottom left.
Yes. The one with Jesus in it.
That's Jesus showing up in the Kirtland Temple.
Yeah, exactly. I thought, okay, now why are they using a picture of Joseph and Oliver meeting Elijah, Elias, Moses, and Jesus in the Kirtland Temple? Now, this happened in 1836 in April, right? So I think it's very interesting because in January of 1836 is when Joseph Smith did ordain a Black Latter-day Saint, Elijah Abel, to the priesthood. So right here in this picture, the priesthood was on the earth for all men, regardless of race, creed, whatever. And then after this picture, it kind of went away for about 135 years. But let's remind everybody that here it is back again. It's been back for 47 years. So I just thought that was unusual. Just wanted to draw attention. And of course, the picture on the right is N. Eldon Tanner at the tabernacle reading the letter, letting everybody know, and you can see everybody sustaining. So, I mean, you don't remember that, do you, RFM? Because you hadn't joined the church yet.
I think I had, because this must have been an October general conference,
Yeah.
which would have been my first general conference as a member. I was actually baptized later the same month.
Okay.
That of June 1978. I
Right.
did notice, however, a couple things about this picture, bottom left. The first I noticed is with the announcement that they managed to do this. They managed to make this announcement of this very important and significant event without mentioning black people or people of color or anything. Yeah. They got a picture that doesn't have any black people or people of color in it to commemorate this event. Although it does look, I can see Joseph Smith, bottom right. Oliver Cowdery on the bottom left looks like he's doing a bit of interpretive dance to express his joy at seeing the risen Savior.
But again, the picture has nothing to do with lifting of the priesthood ban. And in fact, Joseph Smith was conferring a priesthood on everyone at that time. Maybe when Jesus came back in the Kirtland Temple, that's what he told Joseph. Knock it off, dial it back. I need to take it back for 135 years. I don't know.
It's a really good point you make. It has nothing to do with it, except for the implication that there was actually Jesus coming back to reveal that this priesthood ban needs to be lifted in 1978. Maybe that's the implication.
Maybe that's it. I just thought it was unusual, and it is on the church's web or Facebook page. So it must have been, okayed by them. So anyway, so that happened 47 years ago today, in case anybody's interested. Now we will move on to RFM and his big story.
Ago today that Jesus did not show up to the apostles in the Salt Lake Temple and tell them to lift the ban.
Yes, read Second Class Saints by Matthew Harris, and you'll find out what really happened.
So Widow's Mite, top story. Widow's Mite has now dropped an 82-page document. As of yesterday, we just had Professor. He may be president someday. He's an up-and-comer.
He should.
Spencer Anderson, professor of accounting from Indiana University, on the show to go over some of the high points of this meticulously detailed and exhaustively researched over a period of over a year document by the people at the Widow's Mite. So I wanted to say a couple things here. I'm just going to try and basically describe what it is that happened. Okay, here we go. We all know, I hope, that the church was embroiled in a bit of controversy with the Securities and Exchange Commission because for a period of around 20 years, they weren't filing the documents they were supposed to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission because the church did not want the government to know, and by extension did not want its members to know how much money it had in the U.S. stock market. Now, they got a lot of money in other places, but this is the stuff that relates to the U.S. government and the forms involved. So the U.S. stock market amounts. They didn't want the government to know. So they created 13 dummy. Some people counted as 14. There was a lot of dummy corporations that the church created in order to divvy up the assets that the church actually held and assign them to different ones of these dummy companies so that nobody would know how much money the church had, because the church isn't, and Ensign Peak isn't among any of these dummy companies. So all that stuff's going on. It's going on for a period of like 20 years. And what the Widow's Mite report has concluded now, and what the report strongly suggests, is that the church was doing this for more than just keeping its members in the dark about how much money they had, but it was also in order to allow them to be more likely to get away with defrauding the U.S. government by underreporting its income, its taxable income, so it didn't pay taxes on it. Okay, having said all that, the church is a nonprofit organization. So Ensign Peak is also part of the church. It's an auxiliary. It's part of the church. So it's set up as a nonprofit. It's set up as a charitable nonprofit. But, okay, so let me say, so what that means to me and what that's always meant to me is my understanding has been that it doesn't have to pay taxes on the money that it gets on its investments in the stock market. That's all true. However, the tax code does look at some income from some investments as being outside of that exclusion. Even if you're a nonprofit, there are certain things you can invest in. You get money from them. You still got to pay taxes on them. All right. That's the main thing. And the main thing they're looking at is the somewhat unusual and not very often used entities called PTPs. And PTP stands for publicly traded partnerships. So there are publicly traded partnerships. I'd never heard of them before, but then I'm not really knowledgeable about this area. What Spencer Anderson told us was that even people who know about this, a lot of times they don't know about these PTPs because they're not that common. There's only around 50 of them in existence. You're not going to find them on the S&P 500. That's for regular corporations with regular stocks. These are publicly traded partnerships. Now, under the code, if you invest in one of these publicly traded partnerships and you make money off of it, which is the whole idea, that money, that income is taxable to the IRS, to the U.S. government, even though the church is a nonprofit. Okay? So all the other regular stocks, no, they don't have to pay tax on them because it's a nonprofit. But for this group, this limited group of investments in PTPs, they do have to pay taxes on realized income. Okay. So having said that, the problem is that, number one, they had a lot of money invested proportionately. They had a lot of money invested, maybe 1% of their total, but that's a lot for these kinds of unusual investments. So they have a lot of money invested in these, so much so that the church has, well, there are certain lists. Let's see if I can find one here, okay? Here are some of the identified PTP investments that the church had over the years. And I'll go ahead and I'll put us down here at the bottom. That'll make it a little bit bigger. Enterprise Products and Partners. That's one where the church at its peak EPA position size had $387 million invested in it at the peak of its investment in Enterprise Product Partners. Now, a lot of these, by the way, I don't know if I had said this, a lot of these are oil and gas companies. For whatever reason, I don't know what it is, but they end up being organized along these lines such that it has these tax consequences for people who invest in them. And then there's a whole bunch of others of these PTPs that have been identified by the widow's mite that the church held for periods of time. All right. And here's one at the very top here. This was pulled off of the internet. And if you look at the top square, okay, and you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll see Argyle Research, LLC. What this is showing who the top owners of this particular PTP were. And this particular PTP is KMP, which stands, I think it says for, is it Kinder Morgan? Anyway, Injury Partners. I'm sorry, I can't quite read that. It's so small. But anyway, this is a PTP, and the church has the 4th position of ownership. In other words, it owns the 4th largest amount of investment in this particular publicly traded partnership. And the people who are around them are people like, there's Bank of America is number 2. JP Morgan is number 3. So you can see that the church is up there with the big boys, but you say, how do you know it's the church? Well, it's Argyle Research, LLC. We wouldn't know it was the church. The church didn't want anybody to know it was the church. And that's why they created this dummy company called Argyle Research, LLC. Now, we wouldn't have known about the church's holdings in these PTPs, except for the SEC scandal, where it was revealed that the church was using all of these dummy companies in order to hide how much money they had. One of these dummy companies was Argyle Research, LLC. So by cross-referencing now the documents involved, the widow's mite has figured out that the church was heavily invested. Once again, that's proportionately, but heavily invested in these PTPs, these publicly traded partnerships. By the way, are there any questions that you two have so far?
No, you're doing a great job explaining it. It is very
Okay.
complex, but it kind of boils down to some simple concepts at the end.
Well, here's another document that's from this 82-page report. And let me go ahead and put us over here on this side. All right. So it's titled Summary of Enzyme Peak's Notable UBTI Triggering PTP Dispositions. Now, the UBTI stands for Unrelated Business Taxable Income. That's the income that you get, or that the church got, from these PTPs. Because it's unrelated business income, it's taxable. So it's unrelated business taxable income. It's unrelated to the nonprofit aspect of the church under the law. Okay. It's not a question of opinion about, I think this should be, but the other stuff shouldn't be. This is just the way the law works. And this is the law that the church is running headlong into by what it was doing. So the next thing you need to know is that the time when the church has to pay tax on these PTPs for the money they're getting from them isn't yearly or quarterly. Under the law, you pay the tax on a PTP investment when you sell, all right, or otherwise liquidate or get rid of it. So once you sell that, now you have to pay the tax to the IRS, to the federal government, based upon the money that you'd earned over the entire time period that you held it. Okay? Does that make sense? So the longer you hold something, a PTP, and the more you have invested in it, as a general rule, that means you're going to have more income at the end of it when you sell it, and when you sell it, you're going to have to pay more in taxes because you've made more off of it. So what they did was they went back through, and in an incredibly meticulous fashion, I've got to really take my hat off to the people at the Widow's Mite. They've done so much investigation in this, and they've gone through and they've looked at all the different PTPs that were owned by the church, which means they had to go back and cross-reference it with all the dummy shell companies that we now know the church was operating under during these time periods, right? And look at them. And then if you look at this diagram, you have every year from 2003 up to 2021. And you have the listing of the different PTPs, those partnerships that the church owned. I'm just going to say the church owned it because the reality is the church owned it, regardless of what dummy company name it was under during the time period. The ones that are bolded now, those represent significant UBTI. That's the money you got to pay in taxes. Bolded lines represent significant UBTI triggered by selling very large and or long-held positions. So in other words, when you're selling some PTPs that you've had for a long time and they're very large, or both, one or the other, or both, you're going to be paying taxes on that, almost surely. Okay? And that's why they're bolded here, so you can keep track of them. Bottom line is, the church didn't pay the taxes that were owed. And the taxes that were owed, let me see here, if I still even have my phone around here. It's probably charging. I had something on I was going to use, but I'll try and not use it now, get around it. PTPs accumulate taxable income over time. So this is a sample chart that they're using, okay, showing if you've got two axes. One is time, and the other is the size or the length that it's held. You're going to end up paying more taxes on these PTPs over time. And that's why the taxable amounts are represented by these little blue circles. So you can see, of course, as time increases, even on a small amount, it gets bigger, and so on, if you invest more or hold it longer. I think that's pretty simple to understand as a simple XY axis.
If you own, I was just gonna say, if you own the stock for 10 years and it just keeps going up, you've owned it for that amount of time. The moment you bought it at a certain price, you sold it at a much higher price, you have a ton of tax. If you get rid of it in small increments of time, I'll let you finish, but I'll just note that yes, the longer they hold it, the more they pay.
Yeah. If you got $100 and you hold it for 10 years, or $1,000 and you hold it for 10 years, it's going to grow. That's going to be down at the bottom line heading right? But if you invest $1 million and you hold it for 1 year, well, that's going to grow probably more than the other. So it's bigger, but it's held less time. All we're saying is that the longer you hold something or the bigger it is, okay, or both, the more money you're going to get from it. And therefore, when you sell it, you're going to owe more taxes. And what they're using for the taxable amount here is around 20% is what they estimate would be the taxable portion that the church would have owed had they paid it. Well, they owed it anyway, regardless of whether they paid it, on the publicly traded partnerships owned by the church. Now, taking that diagram, what they've done is they have a slide titled, After 2018, UBTI from PTPs looks roughly as expected. So the taxable income from these partnerships looks like you would expect it to. The square on the bottom says the expected UBTI, the taxable income from the PTPs. So this is what the widow's mite in that box predicts would be the expected taxable income they would have to pay on these partnerships. And for the time period from 2018 to 2021, only that time period, the square on the top is what the church actually paid in their taxable income on these partnerships. And if you look at those two, that's pretty darn close. They're very, very similar. There's a couple of differences, but they're not large. What that means is that after 2018, the church paid basically the correct amount of taxes on their PTPs, all right? And the widow's mite was able to predict how much they would have to pay and did so with extraordinary accuracy, okay? So what they predict the church would pay is what the church paid. But 2018 was a signal year because that's right around when it was that the whistleblower came forward. And there was all that press and the newspaper stories about the church. The church knew it was being watched at that point. So the question then becomes, we know that after the church knew it was being watched, they appear to have complied with the law in paying taxes on their PTPs. The question is, was the church doing the same thing and paying their taxes on their PTPs before the whistleblower, before 2018? Or were they doing something else? And this is really an important slide here. Because if you look down in the bottom square, this is from 2007 to 2017, so this 10 or 11 year period immediately before 2018. And based upon the PTPs that were owned by the church, which the widow's mite can get access to through documents available at the IRS website, and the church and the widow's mite can also look at those individual PTPs, the businesses, and see how well they did. So based upon those two pieces of information, they can predict how much the church should have been paying at around a 20% rate of taxes on the income they were getting from their PTPs. The square at the bottom shows the anticipated taxes that the church should have paid during this decade on their PTPs. And you see all the blue circles again, right? Lots of blue down there. The square at the top is what the church actually paid to the IRS in taxes on their PTPs between 2007 and 2017 before they were being watched, and while this was all still a secret. And so what the stark contrast appears to be is that after the church had the whistle blown on them and the regulators were breathing down their necks, all of a sudden they start complying with the law. But in the 10 years prior to that, they weren't even coming close. In fact, there's only a very few small blue dots as to what was actually reported by the church and paid. And then there's a host of little red dots. You see those little red dots throughout? Those represent small losses that the church was reporting. The bottom is what the widow's mite anticipates they should have been reporting and paying. The top square is what they actually did report. Now, the reason these both are important together is because what the widow's mite shows in the slide from 2018 to 2021, that using their methodology, they are quite capable of predicting with extreme accuracy what it is the church should be paying. And that's why those slides are so similar. Once again, the bottom slide being the prediction by the widow's mite as to what the church should have been paying, and the top square being what the church actually did report. And if the church could do so good on that time period from 2018 to 2021, what do we think when they use the same methodology for the prior decade from 2007 to 2017, and what the church reports is so dramatically different? All right. Then the widow's mite, they look at this looks bad, but they know this is a strong allegation that they're making. They're alleging tax fraud by the LDS Church in the tens of millions of dollars, even hundreds of millions of dollars over this time period. So what they wanted to do was they wanted to go the extra mile, and this is very important, by the way, that they did this, was they came up with any possible innocent explanation for this data. In other words, is there any way the church could try to, in reality or not, explain away this data by saying, well, this is what we were doing. We weren't really defrauding the federal government. We weren't really engaged in tax evasion. We were just doing something else that accounts for the data. And the bottom line is that they went through 5 of these. They came up with 5 possible innocent explanations. They go through all 5, and basically none of them hold any water. 2, 3, 4, and 5 don't make any sense. And you'll see over in the right-hand column what the data says. Not likely, not likely, not likely. Number 5 was not supported. And number one, which was Ensign Peak paid the full taxes. Oh, yeah. Ensign Peak. This is the possible innocent explanation. And this is how far they've gone in order to try and help the church out and try and come up with some way that this doesn't look as bad as it looks. And one of them is number 1, which is actually the church did lie or misrepresent on its tax forms. It misrepresented about the PTPs, but it nevertheless took all the money that they owed on that, but that they weren't reporting to the IRS, and then paid it some other way to the IRS. Yeah, that's possible, but it's really unlikely, in my opinion. Now, all that the widow's mite people and all that Spencer Anderson was willing to say was, we don't know because we don't have the data. But when I asked him, I said, are you aware of any time in history when this has ever happened, when some company or individual has lied to the IRS about certain investments, not reporting the income, but then went over here on the side and in some other category paid what they owed anyway? And he was not aware of any. I also asked him if you could use the same excuse to report any tax fraud. And he said, yeah, basically you could. It's a wood tool, right? Any tax fraud could be possibly explained by this way without access to their books. And hopefully the IRS will pick this up. We'll do an investigation. We'll find out what the truth is here and get to work. Get to work on this, because the church has been apparently intentionally defrauding the federal government by underreporting substantially its income, specifically from publicly traded partnerships, in an effort to, I'm trying to use my words here. I said something about tax. It's tax evasion for tax evasion. I had said tax avoidance in the last podcast, and Spencer had corrected me. Says, no, tax avoidance is perfectly legal as long as you're doing it according to the law. We all do that. We take exemptions, deductions, blah, 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 right? We got that. This is tax. This is not tax avoidance. This is tax evasion is what's being alleged here. My understanding is that the IRS is very underfunded. And so frequently, if they're ever going to move on, they don't have a lot of resources to go and investigate things. So a lot of times if there's going to be any action from them, you basically have to do all the work yourself, do all the investigation yourself, hand it to them with a bow tied on it if you got any chance of their taking action on it. So in other words, you got to do all the investigation yourself and give them the case. And that's what the Widow's Mite is effectively doing with this report. This is information that the IRS probably has not had up to this point. I'm not going to say all of it, but the strong stuff in it, I think the IRS has no clue about this. And we can keep our fingers crossed that they're going to think this is as significant as the Widow's Mite does and as I do. Now, one last slide. Actually, I'm not going to use this slide, okay? That's going to take us into a few other areas. We used that last slide at the end of the last show with Spencer Anderson, but that's going to get us into the weeds a little bit more, and we don't have time for that here. The other show was like an hour, 40 minutes. Yeah. Okay, so there's the story on the Widow's Mite report and the allegations of tax fraud by the LDS Church. You know, the apologists before were saying about the SEC stuff. Well, the church never defrauded the federal government. This is just filing the wrong forms. Okay. There was no money. There was no money that was kept or fraud that was involved or tax evasion that was involved. That was the big apologetic, you remember, for the SEC scandal. It wasn't true for that, really. Well, there wasn't any money involved, right? It was just the secrecy and the fraud and the dummy shell companies and all that kind of stuff. With this one, we got money involved. And that apologetic is not going to fly on this one. That's my period.
Bill, did you have some comments? I know you wanted to make a few, I think you said, about this topic.
Yeah, so first, why does anyone trust a church leadership who, after the 13F, the SEC, all the other dishonesty, this clearly looks like tax evasion? Now, again, they might have an explanation, but their explanation would be an anomaly. It would be strange. It doesn't, no one in this realm of knowing what's going on here could come up with any explanation for why it looks the way it does other than tax evasion. And they would have to come up with an extreme explanation, because one of the things Spencer pointed out was that the handling of the PTPs was different than their handling of the stock. So they indicate by their behavior that they understood that this needed to be treated differently and had to be obscured and obfuscated differently. They moved these PTPs from one dummy company to another. One dummy company would sell it in November, and then April the next year, one of the other dummy companies would then buy that amount back, creating some distance of time so that if one of them ever got caught, one explanation would be if one of them got caught, they would see it purchased, they would see it sold, and the amount owed on the taxes would be just that entity. They wouldn't be able to go back and say, well, like someone else sold a stock. Like if I sell a stock tomorrow and then my brother buys it a year from now, no one knows that connection. So there was behaviors that seemed deeply intentional. Last thing I'll say, tithe payers. If anybody listened to that show or listens to this one, faithful tithe-paying Latter-day Saints, you've seen your church cheat and get caught with the SEC. You've seen this now coming forward. You've seen Russell Nelson lie over and over about stories in his life. You've seen Elder Holland do the same. You've seen a history, Elder Oaks and the electroshock therapy that he denied happening at BYU when it actually started under his leadership. If you're a tithe-paying, believing Mormon, at what point do you stop giving the church the benefit of the doubt and you start to recognize that these 15 men seem to be quite corrupt, dishonest, deceptive? They're just not the good people you would like them to be. To the SCMC who watches our content, you are recording You're recording information to pass back to the church, to keep records of what the anti-Mormons say. But your church is the dishonest system. Its leaders are the corrupt ones. And meanwhile, your job is to write down the things that the whistleblowers say, the truth tellers say. To the apologist, you're going to defend this too. You're going to say something. You're going to come up with some workaround, some explanation, because the last thing that you'll never do is to walk forward and say, I'm done. These guys are dishonest and they lie. No, you come up with a Rube Goldberg machine for any problem in the church, and you'll do it here. And lastly, to the LDS Church, and by that I mean the 15 guys at the top. If this is true, and I don't even need this to be true, I can go to 1,500 other things. But to the LDS Church and its leaders at the top, you constantly display that you're the worst kind of human beings who will do anything to make an extra dollar, to make people feel shame so they stay a little more loyal to the system, and you'll do anything to hide the history so nobody can change their mind having full information and hence consent. And that's all.
I'll put a
And
coda
that's
on
all.
that by saying, great comment, Bill. And we here at the Mormon Newscast consider the matter reopened.
Yeah.
There it is officially. So no, that you said it perfectly, Bill, and people were, chiming in the comments about how well you stated all that. And somebody made a comment that made me realize that they said, oh, but most people will say, even if it's the leadership, they'll say that's not the church. Even if leadership, and it's happened from time to time. We've seen it, where the leadership is caught. They still have a way to say that's not the gospel, that's not the church. I want to know what the gospel in the church is if it's not the behavior of these people that are in charge. My other thought about this, just as we end this segment, is the church requires complete, excruciating honesty from its members, and we are conditioned to give it, to the point that we will tell them if we masturbate or if we view pornography. I mean, the excruciating nature of the honesty that is required, it's soul crushing. And yet it doesn't seem to be anything that they have to have any accountability for at all on any level. So to me, that's very disturbing. But you're right. A lot of people don't realize that or see it that way. Yep. Great reporting. And again, everybody, this was just, the tip of the iceberg. After this, or when you have time, go back and watch Professor Spencer explaining all this with Bill and RFM, and you'll get more of a feel for it. It was an excellent episode. And I will say that it was easy to understand. Even though it's complex, you guys did an excellent job of helping people understand. And once you see what you're talking about, you can't unsee it. So please go watch that. All right, let's move on to our next story, which is Fairview, I think, again. Is that what's in order? I think it is. It's hard for me to keep track. Here we go. All right. Every week there's something with Fairview. Last week, Fairview had filed an appeal with the Zoning Board of Adjustments to look at the 5-2 vote that passed the Fairview to LDS Temple, right? They said there were some irregularities there, and instead a supermajority was needed. So since then, and I was really excited, I got to break the news on Mormonish. We had an episode where we talked to the lawyer of the Fairview United group. Since then, they have now filed an actual lawsuit in district court over the same issue. And as everybody says, the residents of Fairview and the people on the town council, this is not about the LDS Temple. This is about procedures in the town. Legality, yes or no, but it could affect the LDS Temple, if that makes sense. So today we're going to talk a little bit about this lawsuit that has now been filed in district court. There's a lot of information. RFM's going to chime in here at the end, but I wanted to I finally have an awesome map. Fairview United put this out, and I think this will help us understand what we're talking about. Prior to the vote of the town council to pass or not pass the conditional use permit, granting a variance so they can build the temple, the residents in the Fairview United group had registered and logged letters of protest. Now, if 20% of the residents, I've said this over and over, you guys can probably quote me, based on land area, are not okay with this, it takes a super majority of the town council, meaning 6 out of the 7 votes, 6-1. They didn't get that. They said this is passed at 5-2. And this is where the whole question lies. So how do you protest and how do you calculate this? Well, you take the land that the church is going to build the temple on. That's right in the middle, the white area right there. And then you go out 200 feet, right? And everybody who owns land within that area supposedly is able to log their, reaction, yes or no to what's going to be built. So this says right here, this section shows 3 color-coded protest zones extending 200 feet out from the subject's property, the land where the LDS Church is going to build. So the green zone, that's the biggest zone right there that you can see. Northwest and east sides of the property, you can see that. All of it is within the town of Fairview. Everything green there is in the city limits of Fairview. And these landowners can legally protest, meaning they can write those letters. They can say, I don't think this is a good project for my town. They can do that. And they can, the land counts toward the 20% threshold that triggers the need for a vote. So, it's a huge calculation based on this 200-foot protest zone that anybody in this green zone that writes a letter to the city and logs it prior to that original meeting, they're counted in that 20% because we're trying to reach that threshold to trigger a supermajority.
Rebecca, hey, I don't mean to throw you off here at this point, but in their written objection, do they have to do something to notify the city that they live in that zone?
Yeah, the city had to have notified them about the ability they have to weigh in on this issue.
And the city did that.
And the city did that. Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll find out where they didn't do that in a minute here. So yes, you would have received a letter if you lived in this green zone that said, hey, there's this issue. You have till this time to log your response. Do you want to say yes? Do you want to say no? Do you want to not respond at all? If you don't respond at all, you're kind of counted as a yes because you're not protesting. You're not disagreeing. So you're, kind of a non.
Are you counted as a yes or just not counted? Because those are two different things, right?
Yeah, I'm calling it yes, meaning that it's a non-no, if that makes sense. You're definitely not part of the 20% that is protesting if you do not log any response.
Right.
So in my simplistic way of thinking about it, you're okay with it. You're counted as being all right with it. So, okay, did I switch this? Okay, so zone 2, here we go. This is this little orange area at the bottom of the green zone. This is directly south of the church's property, which again is this big white square. And it's along Stacy Road. That's that little red line going parallel there. And this is also within Fairview. If you live there, you also can be counted. And these owners' land, and again, we're going off land area, can also count toward the protest threshold, that threshold of 20%. Okay, so here's where it gets confusing. And here is where, did I switch it or not? Yes, zone 3, the red zone. Oh my goodness. Okay, the red zone you can see there at the very bottom of the map. This is south of Stacy Road. This is on the other side of Stacy Road. I feel like I know Fairview geography better than like my own town, even though I've never been there. I spent so much time talking about it. I bet all of you do too. So red zone, south of Stacy Road, and it is in the city of Allen. In the red zone, this is not Fairview. This is the city of Allen. I mean, they're right there across the street from each other. I live in a place like that where it's right across the street. I'm sure a lot of you probably do too. It's pretty common.
So Rebecca, I'm so sorry. Is the yellow/orange, the yellow zone there that was on the previous slide, that's just a road? That's just Stacy Road?
No, Stacy Road is the red. And that's the other question too. How do you count the area of a road? Is that a yes or a no? All these things kind of weigh in. So
I think that's a wash.
Yeah. And it's very complex. There was another map where they really had it laid out with the square footage and all that. I did not want to show that. I'm trying to give kind of a simplistic explanation of how this all works. But yeah, as far as what they're presenting in court or in these appeals and the lawsuit, it's really complicated and they've really measured everything out. So in this red zone, this is the city of Allen. So these properties do not qualify under the Texas protest rules for Fairview zoning changes because they're in another town. They're not even in Fairview. They're not part of this. The town improperly included this zone to inflate the total land area, making the percentage of protesting landowners seem smaller. So the people who lived in the red did not need to be notified. They did not.
Were they notified?
They were not notified because they did not need to be notified because they are not on the tax rolls of Fairview.
Right, because they're in a different
weigh
town.
in. Yeah,
But
they
they still
can't
ca-
weigh in.
But they still counted their property as part of the total.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And that's exactly, very simplistically, what the residents are saying. These landowners, whether they wanted the temple or not, they didn't even have any leg to stand on in the town because they're not on the tax rolls. They're not members of the town of Fairview. Okay. So they go on to say that the key issue that the plaintiffs, that's Fairview United, which again is FU, Fairview United argued that Zone 3 should be excluded from the protest area because the Allen landowners, the town of Allen, they aren't taxed by Fairview. They don't pay taxes to Fairview. They weren't entitled to any notice, and they were not given any notice. They had no idea this was even happening, that there was a line being drawn around their properties, and they aren't allowed to protest zoning in Fairview. So they have no standing anywhere in Fairview, yet the square footage of their property has been able to say its piece, if that makes sense. And this is what the Fairview United residents are saying is not correct. So in summary, the map proves that too much land was wrongly included in the protest area calculation. Specifically, they're talking about Allen property. And of course, when you have too much land included, that dilutes that 20% that they're trying to arrive at, because these Allen residents are a non-entity, yet their property's been counted. Once corrected, the protests meet the legal threshold for a supermajority vote. So they're saying if you calculate it without the Allen property, and like you said, there are some issues about roads and counting that, but here we'll just talk about Allen. If you calculate the 20% without that, they have met that with their protest letters, triggering a supermajority, meaning that they needed 6 votes to 1 to pass the temple application. So the final thing in the summary is, because that vote didn't happen, it was 5-2. The lawsuit argues that the CUP, the conditional use permit put forward by the LDS Church, was invalidly approved. So again, this isn't about the temple, but this can affect the temple. And so I threw up a couple of these things, RFM. You can talk about these. This is the appeal itself, if you just want to briefly bring up anything that you noticed today on this. Oh, there he is.
I got my copy from you. Thank you so much.
He's got it. He's going through it.
There's a couple things. First off, I was okay with fractions in junior high, but this was still confusing to me because the 5-2 and the 75%, right? And you would think 5-2, isn't that more than 75? Well, it's not. It's just a little bit less than 75%, which means in order to have the supermajority required, you have to have 6-1. They didn't have that. That was one of the things I looked at. The second thing that I looked at was that, amazingly, as it so often seems to happen in situations like this, including those properties from Allen, was it? From the other town that's not Fairview?
Yep.
Makes a difference. When you're trying to look and see if the people who are opposing, who are in that property range, 200 feet around the temple, adjoining and 200 feet, it's slightly less than 20%, 17.916%.
Yep. It's close.
If you include the red stuff, because the inclusion of extra property that shouldn't be included diminishes the percentage, right? So if you include it, you have 17.916%, which means it's less than 20%, which means you did not need a supermajority of vote at the city council. But if you don't include it, and I don't see why it should be included, it's another city. If you don't include it, then the protesting property owners becomes 21.274%. So it's over 20%. So this is a huge deal.
Huge. It is a huge deal. And what's interesting, what I learned when we interviewed the lawyer on Mormonish, I think we put that out on Saturday, is that the town itself, the mayor had said, you should file this because we want our procedures in the town to be correct. So it has nothing to do with the LDS Temple. We want to do the right thing as a town. We want this to legally pass, or perhaps to have to start over, but we want to do it legally, everything up and above board, ducks in a row in the town, so that everybody can move forward and be comfortable with the decision. Because as it is now, you're going to have the people saying, yeah, that's not fair, and the other half will go, no, it seems fair. So they need some legal relief here.
And yet the mayor is telling the citizens they need to go forward and file this because the mayor can't do it himself because then he's acting contrary to the interests of the city who did vote this way based upon this understanding.
Exactly. And what the town council did do is they appointed, as I talked about last time, a lawyer for the zoning board, because don't forget, they're talking to the zoning board about, saying, is this legal? Everybody's trying to find out, is this legal? Is this right? We want to do the right thing. So, but yeah, it's a fascinating scenario. And again, they're calling it like a unicorn. It has never happened. It will never happen again, And until something like that does happen, you don't know that you have to, make sure your codes are written correctly, make sure things are calculated correctly. So it's a cautionary tale to any town, I think, who looks at this when the stakes are really high. So
yes.
Yep. So I think if you don't have anything else, that's the lawyer, Mark Johnson. And again, everybody can go to fairviewunited.net to read more about this. And, you can donate to them, if you'd like to donate to what they're doing. Again, this is for the benefit of the whole town to figure this out so it can just be put to rest with finality. So that's what they're doing. All right. Yeah, that was some more. Okay. I think the next story is Bill's.
So this was in Newsweek. This was an article that ties into all this Pew research that's been done, that's been coming out over the last few months. Map shows U.S. states where religion is disappearing the fastest. So you've got a top line news publication putting this out. Here's what to know. The Pew's 2024 survey suggested that, and I'm getting right to the crux of it. The article wasn't really that big, but this is the portions that have to do with Utah. And so I won't spend a ton of time on this, but the Pew's 2024 survey suggested that New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Utah, Wisconsin, Missouri, Montana, and Pennsylvania had the largest growth in the proportion of people who identified as religiously unaffiliated since the 2007 study. In the most recent study, 48% of New Hampshire's respondents said they were not affiliated with organized religion. That's up from 27% in 2007. So in 2007, 27% of the population said, we have no religious affiliation. Today, that's almost half. That is insane in terms of the statistical increase there. Massachusetts rose from 17% in 2007 to 37% in 2024, a 20% jump, while Utah and Wisconsin increased from 16% to 34%, an 18% rise. Utah is in the top 3 states in terms of what in the past studies people said they were had a religious affiliation. And then today they go, I'm not affiliated with any religion.
Bill, can I ask you a question?
Please.
If Massachusetts goes from 17% to 37%, isn't that more than a 100% jump?
Yes, because if twice as many people, and again, populations change, so everything's relative. We're not talking exact numbers here. But if twice as many people, in terms of a percentage of the population, went to being religiously unaffiliated, it would be 34%. So yes, it's a 20% jump in the percentage that they're recording, but what it means is that it was more than double because the original percent is 17. So rather than being 17% again, it's now 20% of people as an increase. So yes, you're right, but this is the way they displayed the numbers. And so you'll see it here on a map, the percentage change in religiously unaffiliated. By the way, I'll go back, RFM, just to make the point in terms of Utah. Utah went from 16. If it had just doubled in the number of religiously unaffiliated people, it would be 32%. It went to 34. Since 2007, as a percentage of Utah's population, more than twice as many than in 2007 now claim to be religiously unaffiliated. When the church talks about growth, somebody sooner or later is going to have to acknowledge that that is not true for Utah. Now, it can be offset by population growth. So the population could hypothetically grow in greater numbers so that you still had more believing Mormons in the state than you did in 2007.
You would have to more than double and
Yeah.
be exclusively in those categories.
Yes. But there are other data points that would be important to understanding the complexity of the conversation. But I will only say that you went out and you surveyed 100 people in 2007, and 16 of those 100 people said, I don't belong to any church. Today, you knock on the doors of Utah residents, and 34% of them say they do not belong to any church. That is huge. And Utah's at the top of the list. Again, this is happening across the nation. We'll see that in the map on the next slide. But Utah is in the top 3 states for where this is happening. And because half the population, at least just a few years ago, were LDS. And we've seen news reports come out in recent years where Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County and various other places in Utah, and then Utah as a whole, finally went below like the 50% threshold.
Mm-hmm.
But often these data points are based on what the church says about its membership in comparison to what the state says about its totals. And what the Pew Research study is showing is that more than twice as many as a percentage have left their affiliation with religion in totality from 2007 to now. And you can see that on the map here. Percentage of change in religiously unaffiliated adults by U.S. state. And then you can see the little color bar at the top, the very, very, very dark red, because that was the extreme, was negative, a 21% difference. And then the best state, and I don't know my map very well, but I don't know if that's like Wisconsin or something up there in the north center.
That looks like South Dakota and Alaska.
Okay.
The darkest blue.
Yeah, so South Dakota would be the least amount of difference, and they had a 1% change. So people in South Dakota are still claiming their faith in the same numbers almost as they did in 2007. Utah is one of the 3 darkest states, and you can see that. You've got the 2 over there in the East Coast, but you've got Utah standing out sort of on its own. And for me, the only way I can explain that is if I take Mormonism as a huge part of that conversation around why that's happening.
Well, one might think that the biggest changes, given the rise of the nuns and everything, right? The biggest changes would be reflected in those states that are historically the most religious.
Yeah, and I think there's truth to that.
So you got New Hampshire, Massachusetts, you got Utah, Wisconsin, Missouri. Are those the 2 synods?
Yeah, New Hampshire. Church? Say that again.
Wisconsin, Missouri. I mean, aren't there 2 synods? Is it of the Baptist Church? Is it the Lutheran Church I'm thinking of? I bet it's a Lutheran Church. Okay, Wisconsin, Missouri. Montana, don't know so much about. Pennsylvania. Yeah. Okay, so that's a guess. It's a stab.
And I don't think there's another slide for this. Yeah, that's a different story.
And this is self-reporting. I think we need, it's not just somebody making some kind of, estimate or a guess. This is, like you said, knocking on a door and hearing, nope, not so much, not this time.
And I think to what you just said, Rebecca, when we depend on the church's numbers to get a feel for things, we've had numerous instances where the church claims a certain population of Latter-day Saints in a country, only to have them self-report at exponentially lower amounts.
Every time.
And what you're seeing is that Utah in the last almost 20 years has lost its faithful, loyal members as significantly as practically any state in the union in terms of any church losing its people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big deal.
It is a big deal, but I was going to say in terms of politicians who are LDS or LDS adjacent, the state is still covered in that way. And
90%.
Yeah, exactly. And 28 temples in some phase of construction or planning or renovation in Utah. And every single conference, there are more temples being built in Utah. And we're going to talk about one later on in the broadcast. But again, how do you explain that compared to these stats? 28 temples when the membership is shrinking so drastically.
Does this seem quite significant to you? I mean, this seems extremely significant to me that in 20 years, more than twice as many as a percentage no longer want to claim their faith in a religion in Utah. And at least probably half the time, if not significantly more, it's the LDS Church that we're talking about.
Well, the church has said that the reason for the decrease of numbers in California and West Coast states is because they're all moving to Utah. And now I expect they'll say that the reason for this in Utah is because they're all moving back to California.
I'll tell you
Awesome.
my theory on why. I know a lot of people say, of course, the internet in the 90s, but that date, 2007, 8 is extremely important. I'm talking about smartphones, that at your fingertips, you have information, you're able to research something, you can sit in the pew and go, this is BS and go home. I mean, I'm being facetious, but do you know what I mean? The instant at the tip of your fingers information that you can check into things, truth claims, and there it is right there. I think it makes a huge difference.
No, I think you're right, because when I was investigating the church, I had pamphlets and scriptural assignments, especially in the Book of Mormon, for me to read from the missionaries, which of course were, put out by the church. And I read all of those, and I was a very good student. I ended up getting baptized. I was a golden contact. I contacted the missionaries. That's how golden I was. So, yeah. But if I got the pamphlets and I'm reading them, if I've got a computer, a super pamphlet in my pocket, and I can open up and find out, priesthood restoration or translation of the Book of Mormon, I'm going to find out more information there.
Yep. And in real time. I mean, prior to the smartphone, you might hear something in church and think, yeah, I got to go research that Book of Abraham. You forget. You can pull your phone out during class and go, Book of Abraham.
Yes.
Yep. Do you want me to go to the next story? Or I'm
Yeah,
happy.
no, go ahead.
So I'll just note here, this is a really short one too, and then I think I have one little one at the end. An AP reporter explored religion in Utah. She was surprised by what she found. And I'll just note, what's interesting about this story is Mormonism is hardly mentioned. What AP reporter Deepa Bharath, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, what she went into was that the Hindu religion in Utah has more of a presence than she expected to find. And she was pointing out the Spanish Fork Hindu temple and talking at length about all the good they do in the community. And I put a couple of things up there. They do a donation-based yoga class. They have a donation-based diner. So you just make a donation based on whatever you think that was worth and give whatever you want to give. But one of the cool things that does tie to Mormonism in the article is that our good friend Phil McLemore was mentioned as a Mormon yogi, or not yoga, that's the wrong thing, but a Mormon yogi, a wisdom teacher in the sort of Hindu religion or Eastern wisdom traditions. Phil McLemore was mentioned as having some interaction with that Hindu community and doing things in terms of meditation and yoga and other things. So kudos to Phil McLemore for always being involved in the community in getting a mention here in this article. And again, she pointed out that the Hindu faith has a much stronger presence than at least she expected. And from what I could see, there were several very active, large groups throughout multiple places in Utah, not just the Spanish Fork. So there's that article. And I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this, but it was a small one. But I thought Phil needed a mention.
No, I thought that was great. I saw that too. And I do talk to a lot of people who say they've attended events there and they're so excited that's part of the community. And I think it's a growing presence. I think it's growing and it's only going to get bigger. So very cool. All right, let's see what we have next. Like Bill said, I think we have a couple little smaller stories going forward, but there was a lot of news this last week. And here's one. It is June. It is Pride Month, and there's a lot going on. I went to the Utah Pride Parade on Sunday. Yes, it was really fun. Here's a picture. I was watching people march by. I'm like, wait, that's Natasha. There she is. So we snapped a picture, and it was interesting this year, though. There were several companies, that had been there in the past that chose to not participate. And it was kind of shortened by about 7 city blocks. It was a little smaller than it had been in the past. And,
How
due to
long
the
is it
present-
usually?
I mean, it usually takes, several hours, but where we went to sit, where we have sat for the last several years, that was not part of the parade anymore. We had to go half a mile the other direction. So they really did shorten it by several city blocks for whatever reason. But it was amazing, the people that did show up, and I'm going to show a little video from it later. But at the same time I was headed over to the parade, I came across this post on Latter-day Stories, and it says, just in time for Pride, here we go. So it says, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has quietly removed a 2015 statement from its official newsroom website, assuring its members that they are free to support LGBTQ events, groups, prompting questions and timing, with Utah's largest Pride Festival opening its doors this weekend. And I did just check, and what they're referring to is gone, because sometimes they put things back, right? The original statement was made by Elder Todd D. Christofferson in an interview with Church Public Affairs, and it affirmed that members who support same-sex marriage or participated in LGBTQ plus friendly activities, such as marching in pride parades with groups like Mormons Building Bridges or engaging with organizations like Affirmation, would not risk their church membership or temple privileges. So this apparently was a statement made by Elder Todd on the church newsroom. And of course, I looked for that statement somewhere else, and could not find it.
Has anyone preserved it?
I found statements around the statement, and we'll go into that. But what used to be there is now simply we apologize. This is missing. And what it used to say, let me see if I can get to, I think it was back on the other page. But yeah, it was a statement, kind of an interview with Elder Christofferson and the church newsroom. Now, what's interesting is that these statements were made in 2015, and we all know what happened then around the policy change, right? And they were trying to kind of soften it. They were trying to say, this is for the good of the children. This is this and this. Mm-hmm. So this is where this statement came from. But I can't find any sign of it anymore. In fact, the statements that are there now from Elder Todd are kind of the other point of view, the kind that aren't so pleasant. So
do you remember, because that whole year leading up to that revelation on remember the 5th of November was dedicated to the church going out and being in the public and promoting legislation in favor of LGBTQ plus individuals. And that's why one of the reasons it was so scurrilous that they did this behind the scenes in the dark of night. But wasn't one of them a TV show where a woman appeared and a man appeared, and was that man D. Todd Christofferson? And
I think it was
where he said it.
Yeah, he was the one that was out in front because, of course, his brother is a very prominent LDS member of the LGBTQ community. He's even written a book that's a Deseret book. So they kind of marched him out to do all of this. And if we look here, there is kind of a version of his statement. It says, Elder Christofferson's words published on the church's newsroom site since 2015 emphasized inclusivity. We have individual members in the church with a variety of different opinions, beliefs, and positions on these issues and other issues. The statement offered hope for many LGBTQ plus members and allies, suggesting a space for diverse views within the faith. The link was originally on the newsroom, and its removal sparked speculation about the church's intentions. Is this deliberate? Is it a shift in messaging, or is it just website maintenance that happened to be scheduled for June? Well, I looked through, and they've left up an awful lot from Elder Todd that doesn't say this about inclusivity. It's more like, kind of the tough love and the church stance. So it is a question to me that they happen to remove this particular one. Now, I found, like I said, some adjacent things that he had said, because I knew people would ask me, well, where's that statement? Where do they say we could march? Where do they say it's okay? So this is in the Deseret News in an article right then, November 6th, the very next day. Elder Christofferson is there, and he's trying to explain. And the article in the Deseret News says The new policies do not change several developments in the church regarding lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgender people. Elder Christofferson and other church leaders have said repeatedly that Mormons may express political support for same-sex marriage without consequences to their church membership. The updated policy does not alter that. So here's the Deseret News gleaning from all these sources out there that I have not been able to find. Saying that, yes, they pretty much said you can have your opinions and you can act on them. The church also continues to support the Utah, this is what you were talking about, RFM, the Utah Compromise and all similar efforts to provide legal protection for LGBT people in housing and employment. Again, two sides of your mouth, you offer these protections, but then the clause is as long as we can still do what we need to do, as far as that. So
as long as the church gets an exemption. Yes,
an exemption. That's what I'm talking about. Yep. The LDS leaders also have repeatedly said, as can be found on the official church website, mormonsandgays.org, which I do not believe exists anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that exists. But back in 2015, we're talking 10 years ago, this article's from 10 years in the Deseret News, that nobody should be more loving and compassionate than Mormons. Again, they're using the word Mormons. That's interesting. Who should be in the forefront in terms of expressing love, compassion, and outreach. Elder Quentin L. Cook of the 12 said LDS families also are instructed not to exclude or be disrespectful to those who choose a different lifestyle. Isn't it interesting? 10 years ago, because we can point to things said in the last 10 years where that is not the school of thought, is it? So I
the past is a foreign country, I hear.
The past is a foreign country where we were all Mormons, right?
They do things differently there.
Exactly. So back to what Latter-day Stories reports, they say no official explanation has been provided for why this, statement of inclusivity has been removed. An archived version of the article, accessible via Internet Archives, preserves Elder Christofferson's words, which we heard before, but their absence from the live site raises the question of the church's evolving narrative. Does this reflect a change in the church's stance, or is it simply a digital housekeeping issue during Pride Month? Like I said, a lot of his other statements are still up, and they're not as warm and fuzzy as this one that was deleted. And then there are some links you can go over to. This is from Facebook, Latter-day Stories, and you can look this up yourself and click on the links. But I just found this very interesting. If this was taken down intentionally, any thoughts on this, RFM and Bill?
I think it's interesting. Right now, what I've been doing here is scanning the actual transcript. Well, I won't say the actual. I will say the transcript of the interview that D. Todd Christofferson had with Michael Otterson. Remember that famous thing where D. Todd Christofferson was called upon to defend this abomination.
Yes.
And I can't find it yet.
Yeah, no, and I tried to scan today too. I tried to look, and everything he says is just kind of tough love, So I think there was some point where they tried to soft approach, but they've taken that away. So very interesting. I was gonna, the articles in the paper about Pride says this is about everybody, love, support, highlighted the annual Utah Pride Parade. But at the same time, as we've seen, I get pictures, people send them to me, people are flying the proclamation of the family flag, kind of, and as you made such a great point last time when we talked about this, RFM, just the fact that they will fly this as a counterbalance to Pride Month, it shows, how they're using it, kind of wielding this as a weapon. And I had not seen this before. This is a traditional family flag. And this was spotted in Utah County at the marathon. Some kids were holding this. And it was interesting on social media to see what people thought of this. It looks like a husband and wife, but other people said, no, it's a Book of Mormon warrior with a spear, and it's Angel Moroni with a trumpet. Kind of unclear. So I had to do kind of a close-up of what they're calling Angel Moroni. I don't know. That does not look like Angel Moroni to me. No. I'm not sure what that looks like. Yeah, it's a little interesting.
A traditional family, you shouldn't be having two guys back to back. I'm just saying it's a basic idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's supposed to be a man and a woman, and the woman is about to blowing
the trumpet. On that horn. Yeah, she's blowing on that horn.
She's about to blow that trumpet, something. But anyway, so these things are popping up and, very overtly. Everybody is free to express their opinion, but yeah, kind of interesting. Let's see. Did I have any more on that? I think that was it. Oops.
Bill, I was going to say something really quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is not been taken off of the church website is the conversation that Elder Holland and Lance B. Wickman had where public affairs asked, at what point does showing that love, meaning towards those who are LGBT, love cross the line into an inadvertently endorsing behavior? If the son says, well, if you love me, can I bring my partner to our home to visit?
Yep.
Can we come for the holidays? How do you balance that against, for example, concern for the other children in the home? Yeah. You know, because contagion and all. Yeah. Elder Oaks answered, that's a decision that needs to be made individually by the person responsible, calling upon the Lord for inspiration. I can imagine that in most circumstances, the parent would say, please don't do that. Don't put us into that position. Surely, if there are children in the home who would be influenced by this example, the answer would likely be that. There would also be other factors that would make that the likely answer. I can also imagine some circumstances in which it might be possible to say, yes, come, but don't expect to stay overnight. In other words, the majority of the time, don't put us in that position, don't bother. And on rare occasions, maybe, yes, you can come over, but don't expect to stay overnight. Don't expect to be a lengthy house guest. Don't expect us to take you out and introduce you to our friends or to deal with you in a public situation that would imply our approval of your partnership. There are so many. Oh, go ahead.
It's possible to introduce your son without saying he's gay. I'm just, just as an idea. By the way, Elder Oaks. You had said Elder Holland earlier.
Yeah, this is Oaks.
Elder Oaks.
This is Oaks. Yeah, I'm glad that you found this.
For some reason, I confuse Holland and Oaks, so I'm glad to see that you're doing it.
They have a similar agenda, but again, I'll read that line from Quentin Cook. It says, do not exclude or be disrespectful, right? And yet here we have just a few years later, and they are saying this. And do you notice how he doesn't say, I would say this? He says, I can imagine that someone might say it. It's once removed. So it's not an apostle saying it, but he's absolutely dog whistling to people on how to treat it. And I think of Elder Gong, and I think of his son, and we can't show that picture of my son and his partner, so this is how they operate.
And notice what Lance says right after. This is after this answer that Elder Oaks just gave on this situation, which seems like just a nothing. It's your children, you love them. You don't need to treat them any differently. Just introduce them to your friends. Who cares? Elder Wickman says it's hard to imagine a more difficult circumstance for a parent to face than that one.
Is it?
More difficult circumstances than that
How
one.
about the suicides among the LGBT community? People losing their kids who feel so much shame and worthlessness that they take their own lives. I can imagine that would be exponentially more significant.
Yeah. Do we remember what year this was? The Oaks statement. I'm glad you found that. I was going to look for that. And then
I don't know, but every year goes by, and I'm surprised that it's still up there.
Yeah. No,
2006. 2006.
Okay, so that was 2000.
Well, which one does the church really stand behind? When if push comes to shove, get rid of all the carefully worded stuff. This is what they believe.
Yep, that's it. It's getting more and more clear, I think. I think they're, like a diamond. They're honing in on it. So I think that was it. I wanted to show this. This is one of my favorite parts of the Pride Parade. This is Ryan Josiah. He's on a scooter with a cross, and he is just having a great time as Jesus in the parade. This is good.
Will you guys give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound?
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's just really short.
I'm glad Jesus is modeling safe, whatever it is he's driving, safe scooter tactics by wearing
he's got a helmet on. Even Jesus wears a helmet. I took a picture with him later because he was just a hit. He was out there cycling around. He was giving hugs, and it was just great.
No raw dogging for him. That's right.
Nope, not at all. So that was the parade, and we'll just keep an eye on, our statements of inclusivity slowly kind of being dialed back, and some of those other ones left there. Is it a very subtle recrafting of the narrative? We'll just have to keep an eye.
How hot was it out there, Rebecca?
What? Oh, it was so hot. It was absolutely scalding. But I did work on my tan. I think it's looking better. It was fun. It was really fun. Yeah.
I think some of those guys in the parade are going to be burned today.
Yeah, no, they probably are. And it was a really funny day of juxtapositions, as you'll see with my last story, because in the morning I was at Pride where Jesus was, and in the afternoon I was somewhere else, which I'll talk about after Bill's story.
Yeah.
All right. So, Salt Lake Tribune commentary, When Your Loved Ones Leave the Church. This was written by Cinco Paul, Religion News Service, June 6th, 2025. And it says here, it was challenging for composer-screenwriter Cinco Paul when his adult children all left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And here's what he learned. And so it says here, this is just a synopsis. Composer and screenwriter Cinco Paul shares his deeply personal experience of having all three of his adult children leave the church. He reflects on by the way, they're part of that percentage in Utah that's more than doubled.
Oh, you're right. Cinco Paul. It's an interesting name. Is that like Johnny Five?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Johnny Five. Short circuit. All right. So
Johnny Five, alive.
Yeah. He reflects on the common parental impulse to assign blame, wondering if missed prayers or family devotion were the cause. He urges readers to resist that impulse, recognizing that faith transitions are not parenting failures, but expressions of individual agency. You notice, by the way, the wording, and I don't have his exact quotes and stuff here. You can go read the article yourself. But if you go read it, the wording still sort of, they did something wrong, but it's not your job to make them feel bad. And there still isn't this honoring that growth is growth, and maybe growth ends up with someone going from Mormonism to outside the church. But it says here, Paul emphasizes that spiritual journeys are deeply personal and that withholding judgment and laying off self-blame is essential for emotional healing. You don't need to withhold judgment. You can just not judge. Instead of attempting to argue them back into the fold, Paul encourages parents to respond with unconditional love. Unconditional love probably doesn't withhold judgment. The pure love of Christ, and I don't mean the opposite to judge. I just mean that when you withhold it, it's like it's always sitting there. It's always ready to be brought out. But the pure love of Christ, to prioritize listening over lecturing when children express doubts. He also challenges the narrative of sad heaven by reminding readers that the vast majority of humanity has never been LDS. Yet, according to doctrine, all are loved and included in God's plan. Paul finds solace in trusting that divine love transcends human-defined borders and vows to let his love be bigger than that. And his three big takeaways in the article, he numbers them. Don't blame yourself. Love them with the pure love of Christ. And don't be heartbroken. Have faith that God has a plan for all of his children. That was his three main takeaways. I thought I would give my 5. You know me. I thought I'd really quickly get my 5. Here they are. Number 1, don't make faith transitions about your future. I didn't leave to hurt you.
Is it failure?
I don't make my faith transition about your failure. In other words, a parent's failure. I didn't leave to hurt you. I left to be honest with myself. When you interpret my loss of belief as a betrayal, or worse, as a reflection of your inadequacy, it shuts down the possibility of connection. What I want is for you to stay curious about me as I actually am today, not just the version of me that fit inside the faith you hoped I'd stay in. Validate my experience, even if you can't validate my conclusions. Number 2, let go of the need to rescue me. I know you're afraid for me. I used to be afraid too, of the world, of getting it wrong, of letting go of what I'd been told was the only safe path, but I'm not lost. I'm exploring. What I need is not someone trying to pull me back into belief, but someone who's willing to walk beside me as I am, trusting that love and goodness don't require shared theology. Number 3, be willing to update the relationship, not just mourn it. The rules may have changed, but the bond doesn't have to break. Ask me what's sacred to me now. Invite me to share what brings me peace, joy, or purpose. If we only focus on what we've lost, we'll all miss the chance to build something new. We can still laugh, cry, support each other, and show up, but only if we're both willing to step out of the old script and celebrate the growth and goodness of the other person in the here and now. Don't weaponize eternities. Number 4, please don't tell me you'll be sad in the next life without me, or that I've broken our eternal family. It's a cruel kind of emotional blackmail. Whether I'm already grieving, especially when I'm already grieving the distance this creates between us, instead of projecting sorrow into the afterlife, try being present with me in this one. Love me here. That's the only kind of forever we're guaranteed. And number 5, see me as more than my disbelief. I'm still here. I still love having deep conversations, joking with the people who get me, and showing up for the people I love when they need me. Losing my faith didn't change that. It just made me more committed to living with honesty and heart. My loss of faith didn't erase my values or make me an enemy of yours. Please don't reduce me to less active, apostate, or influenced by Satan. Try seeing the complexity and courage it took to walk away from something I once believed in with my whole heart. And those are my 5 tips, which I think his are great, but I'm going to argue that mine are better.
I would argue that too. And I hope you post that somewhere. That was amazing.
It
And
really
I
was.
forgot, I kind of looked him up. He is a LDS, but he's a screenwriter. And he's responsible for producing and screenwriting Despicable Me, Horton Hears a Who, so he's kind of a influencer in the LDS community. But I agree, it was nice, but it still came from a place of, we're correct, but we are able to be magnanimous as we look down on you and try to be understanding. So, no, those were great. Any thoughts, RFM?
Oh, sorry.
I thought it was brilliant that Bill thought to look at it from the kids' point of view.
Yeah.
Instead of the adults.
Well,
Because everybody else is talking for the person who leaves.
right.
The leaders talk for the person who leaves. The left behind family members are talking for the person who leaves, and nobody ever, because the church doesn't want you to go get that person's story. The church doesn't really want you to ask them what happened and how'd that weigh on you and how did you wrestle with that? And man, brave on you for making such big decisions and making new directions in your life and at the expense of losing community and losing relationships. Nobody wants the person who left to speak.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people I've, read about on social media or reached out to me personally who say things like, no one ever talked to me again. No one wanted to know, nobody asked me anything. You're just kind of invisible, whether that's because of fear of what you might say or it's so awkward. So I love what you said. I think that's great. I think you need to post that. I think you need to publish it. It was amazing. All right. One more story and then one more quick little thing. Okay. This has been kind of a big story in the last week. The headline is Brigham Young University is now on Russia's undesirable list. And why? Have you guys been following this?
No.
This is crazy. Not at all. Not one bit. Oh, good. This will all be new then. Great. Okay. So here we go. The Russian government is apparently not a fan of Brigham Young University. And this is from the Tribune. At the end of April, Russia surprisingly placed the religious Utah school on its official list of undesirable organizations. The label the country gives to groups that it considers a threat. Entities on the list are banned from operating in Russia, and anyone affiliated with them can be criminally charged and imprisoned. Like, this is a big
Anyone
deal.
affiliated with BYU can be criminally charged and imprisoned?
Yes.
I'm Radio Free Mormon, and I think that's extreme.
Yeah, no, and here's part of the list, the undesirable organizations in Russia. And there's over 200 organizations, but only 2 universities. So once again, BYU is standing out. And this is kind of a mystery to everybody. So it says, in addition to BYU, the addition of BYU to Russia's list was first reported by the Moscow Times, an online publication known for its English coverage of the country that started in 1992. And as well as being on the undesirable list that now operates outside of Russia. Led by President Vladimir Putin, Russian leaders have targeted any people or organizations it views as critical of the government, including news outlets, human rights groups, and political associations. So these are the kind of groups that are on this list. And what I showed before, that's only part of the list. Like, it goes on and on. But only 2.
This is a badge of honor. This is a badge of honor for BYU then.
But it's so out of the blue, or is it, right? Or is it? We're going to find out. So most of these organizations, and I went to the Daily Universe at BYU, which is where this little clip here is from, to find out, what's their take? Are they closer to it? And they said most of these organizations are human rights groups that directly oppose Russian policies, like they're actively opposing. BYU sticks out like a sore thumb amongst the 232 groups found on the list. Of the 232 organizations, BYU is only the second American-based university on the list. Bard College, a private liberal arts college in upstate New York, was added to the list in 2021 after billionaire George Soros planned to launch a global university to fight authoritarian governments and climate change through a partnership with the school, as reported in the Moscow Times. So very active politically against Russia. BYU, I mean, why? Can you guys even imagine why this would be?
2 words.
Yes.
Young ambassadors.
Oh, it could be. It absolutely could be. So they go on to say,
it reminds me of the story that we did on the Nazism and how the Nazi regime looked upon the church negatively. And I would say, at least in part, again, the church isn't on the list, the school is, so that discrepancy isn't easily explainable. But Mormonism does have, as part of its doctrine, is that America and the freedoms that it has and how it was set up to make a space for that is divinely designed. And I can't imagine that other entities who are see themselves as either enemies or there's a different word I want to use for that, but I would imagine that they're going to be at least a little bit hesitant of entities that see America as being better than everyone else.
Or maybe they finally found out about the white horse prophecy.
It could be that. Now, we haven't had missionaries there for quite a long time. I think it's been 2022 since they were all pulled. So
I've been missing all the kidnappings.
Yeah, no, there was a lot. Yeah, during COVID, it was really rough too. So it says the list from the Ministry of Justice of Russia does not indicate an official reason as to why BYU, which is sponsored by the LDS Church, was added, but it does list a date of publication of information on recognition of the organization's activity as undesirable. And that was February 6th.
This past February?
They say that BYU did something on February 6th. That's when they say they recognize their activities as undesirable. So what in the world could that be? Very interesting. It says that same day, BYU held an event at its David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies called Russia as a Global Threat. It was a discussion led by Sonata Coulter, the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State who oversees policy toward Russia. And this other article from another news source is saying, why did this happen again? They're also mentioning it could possibly be this lecture that was given at BYU called Russia is a Global Threat. Now, I thought that was interesting. And I thought, okay, if she's in town and she's giving this lecture at BYU, and then BYU is basically blacklisted by Russia for this lecture, did she speak anywhere else? February 6th. Here's a little poster for it. Russian is a global threat, and there's BYU. Did she speak anywhere else? Well, she did. Earlier in the morning on February 6th, she gave the very same address at Utah Valley University, the sister university right there in Provo, and they are not on the list, only BYU. So I don't know what that means. Maybe there's
they have to update their intelligence.
Yeah, that could be it too. UVU, maybe is not on their radar as much as BYU, but yes, she apparently did the rounds, and I hadn't seen this mentioned anywhere else, that she also spoke at UVU. So it's kind of interesting that that's a reason for it. Now,
so if we say here that Russia is a global threat,
yes,
is the Mormon Newscast going to be put on that list?
That's what I'm not sure. So everything here is alleged, right? No, I don't know. We try not to be too political, but okay. So what's the collateral damage here? Now, there is a well-known starter on the BYU basketball team. His name is Igor Denham, and he is from Russia, right? He's extremely popular. And here's an article that says what Russia's blacklisting of BYU could mean for Igor Denham and his future. Says Denham was likely as bewildered by the news as most of the general public. According to most anonymous sources, this is in the Daily Universe, as long as Denham does not criticize Putin or the Russian government, he should be fine. This is what they're saying. If he keeps his head down and puts the ball in the basket, he will likely be able to return to his country regardless of his affiliation with the Cougars.
Yeah, my concern isn't whether he can return to his country. My concern is what happens to him when he does.
Exactly. Or his family, because he's pretty dang affiliated. He's a starter for the BYU basketball team,
He's a criminal.
Yeah, according to what we read before,
yes.
Criminal charges. That's right. It says, keep in mind, until there is more information released by the Russian government, the above statement about Denham's future is speculation. True. Nobody knows, but that was the first thing that came to everybody's mind. And of course, where do you go to get right to the heart and the source of what happens at BYU, especially with basketball, you go to the Cougar board. You guys forget I used to be a Cougar. I know all about this. So this is where they discuss basketball. And somebody brought up, can Denham ever return to Russia? And so people weigh in. He's not an alumni. He didn't graduate. He has not gotten his degree yet. He's just playing basketball. Hopefully a Russian judge would make a distinction. They kind of go on and talk about all this. I think it'll be okay. What about his family? And then somebody says something that I think is really interesting as far as a reason for perhaps BYU being put on this list. And I highlighted it here, and it says, in my opinion, I think the Kremlin saw BYU on too many CIA agent backgrounds. What do you guys think about that? I thought that was fascinating.
I think it's a creative idea. I think the timing is better for the Assistant Deputy Secretary of State.
Right. But it could have something to do with that. Think about how many BYU students end up working for the CIA, the FBI. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize that with their foreign language background and their ability to take orders really well. Yeah, a lot of them go into that. So the other thing that's kind of collateral damage, a professor there on campus said the law is really vague. Professor Hardy said, somebody like me, a professor at BYU, it would not be a good idea to travel to Russia right now because of my affiliation. Former students, I don't think will have problems, but it's one of those things where if the Russian government finds something you've done offensive, they could start digging into your biography, your profile, and that could provide some fodder for a court case and prosecution. Professor Hardy was quick to note that once again, simply speculating on what this all might mean. Last academic school year, there were 6 undergraduate and 3 graduate students from Russia at BYU. When asked if any of these students, not including Denham, would be returning to BYU for the fall semester, the BYU International Student Department didn't say anything. Now, interestingly, BYU used...
They didn't say anything?
No comment.
Okay.
Exactly. Now,
Show me
BYU...
the man. Show me the basketball player, and I'll show you the crime.
Yep, that's it. So there used to be a study abroad program at BYU where you could go to Russia. They had many different study abroad programs. They even have like a Russian language house that you can live in. I think I might have dated somebody from the Russian language house back in the 80s. It's where you kind of immerse yourself in the culture. But when I tried to look up their study abroad program, where they used to go to, however you pronounce that, Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, it now says this program is not currently active. So it looks like study abroad is kind of off the table. However, there is study abroad somewhere else. See, it's kind of Russian adjacent where you can kind of get the same kind of experience, but it is in Latvia, but it is not in Russia. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then it says, of course, meanwhile, the larger LDS Church that oversees BYU has not condemned Russia's invasion, but instead it called generally for peace. Notably, the church itself is not on the undesirable list. In other words, the LDS Church is still on the nice list for now. So I guess it's kind of an unfolding story. We'll see what it means. But BYU singled out for this list, very different from the other organizations on the list. Any thoughts?
It's a strange thing when one communism doesn't like another.
Yeah.
It's communism and fascism.
That's the difference. There you
It's
go.
the oil in the water that doesn't mix, famously.
Yep, it is. But,
Which
usually...
I'm sorry, what?
Which one's which?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you can pick.
We don't know.
I'm talking about, of course, the Russians and the Germans a few years back.
Yeah, a few years back. Usually BYU loves, notoriety, loves to show up in the news, loves to be singled out.
They should be here. They should be promoting this. They should be taking out paid full-page ads in the Tribune about this. This is a huge badge of honor for BYU. I think they're missing an opportunity. I'm talking to you, PR department, by not promoting this.
I know they're always voted stone cold sober, most boring university. They get those kinds of awards, and they very proudly, do talk about those in the media. But this will be interesting. So, okay, we're going to go to the last thing here, the Syracuse Temple dedication. And I mentioned that I had some stealth information. That's a picture of me sitting in a car parked across the street from the Syracuse Temple, because I was determined to see if I could catch a glimpse, perhaps, of anything that was going on, because it's right there. My co-host Landon lives right by the temple, so we kind of headed over there right after the Pride Parade to try to catch things. In the news, there were some pictures of this dedication. This is all afterwards. We did not stay until afterwards. Had we stayed, I don't know if we would have been able to get these pictures, because I think it was kind of a side door. But there they all are. President Nelson was in attendance at the dedication, but the prayer that he offered was pre-recorded, like we saw at General Conference, where he was actually there physically, but his interaction with the audience was all pre-recorded. So there he is with lovely Wendy. There's a bunch of them sitting in the white suits. Do you guys know where the white suit came from? I was trying to research that. Why the white suit?
David O. McKay would be my guess, but I don't know. And I want to know why Wendy's not conforming. She's a nonconformist.
She's a nonconformist. She does seem to be a little bit of a rebel. That's right. But as we parked there, and this is about half an hour before the dedication was supposed to take place, people did drive up and park. People did go to, there were several gates. Each one had sort of a person in a suit, kind of looked like security blocking the gate. It looked like you would show a pass and then go in. Now, only certain people are invited inside the temple for the dedication. The surrounding meeting houses that we drove past, packed parking lots, because you can go from, I think, age 8 up and get a special temple recommend to attend a broadcast of a dedication. The last time I did that, I took my kids, and it was our first experience. This is like probably 15 years ago, with the Hosanna shout. And I could tell that they all thought, it kind of went over like a lead balloon. I don't know. I thought it would be different. So, but
they didn't have Dallin Oaks there, did they?
No, this was before the left shark incident. Yeah, it was
He's
very
really
different.
bad at that Hosanna shout.
But so here's a shot of just kind of driving past the temple, and something struck me as kind of interesting. If Phil wants to play this, how intently they were at securing the gates as the meeting started. Gates are being secured here at the Syracuse Temple Open House. You can see that they are closing the gate. President Nelson is inside attending the dedicatory prayer, which is usually said in person by a church leader, is going to be pre-recorded, is what we're hearing, and I guess played at the meeting. But President Nelson is supposed to be in attendance today at the dedication of the Syracuse, Utah temple. There it was, just driving by. Now, if you go to the next slide, it was really interesting because, like I said, there was security, but when the meeting was about to start, look how hard they're trying to secure that gate. I mean, they are working that gate. They had to get that closed. And that was, I guess, to lock people out and maybe lock people in. I'm not exactly sure.
I think it's because President Nelson was there.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. But just that picture just struck me as really funny, that they're just trying really hard. There were some signs that we saw on the road outside. We love you, President Nelson. And then in smaller letters, Elder Cook, because he was almost there. There were a couple different signs. And the strangest thing that happened is, this is me sitting on the left-hand or the right-hand side in the passenger seat. As soon as we parked, a man in a suit came and sat down behind the car.
On the curb?
On the curb, right there. In a suit, sat down by the bumper.
What the heck?
The whole time we were there. I have no idea. I just kind of looked out of the rear mirror to see what was happening. But yeah,
Did you go up and ask him what he was doing?
No. We were, like I said, I was being very stealth just to see what would happen. And there were other cars parked around. There were other people on the street, but it was a strange vibe that someone would come up and sit down on the curb in a suit, right kind of next to the bumper of our car.
All you do is just hit reverse and back up slowly. See what happens.
We could have done something. Anyway, Syracuse Temple now dedicated. The doors are shut. The temple is closed unless you have a temple recommend. The grounds, apparently, as they keep telling us, are open to be enjoyed by people. So go walk your dogs there, I guess. And it is one of 28 temples that is either under construction, dedicated, planning phase here in Utah.
Wow.
So I think
Rebecca,
that's it.
I want to ask a question because you brought up an interesting point.
Yes.
This is a pre-recorded dedication of the temple.
It is.
Once it's dedicated, it is only for faithful Mormons, temple recommend holders, right?
Exactly.
When was this recording? And if it was recorded, if it were recorded a week ago, let's say, was the temple dedicated when the words were uttered or when the tape was played?
Yeah,
Is
and I
it
made a
live or is it Memorex?
exactly. I made a short about that because I thought if he, is in Salt Lake and he's saying the words,
Yep.
using the priesthood power and in
Mhm.
his prophetic voice, do you have to physically be there, or was that temple actually dedicated a week or so ago when he might have made the recording? I have no idea.
You don't know. I do have an idea on this
Oh,
one thing. You don't have to be there. Tokyo Temple dedication, October 1980. All the missionaries in Japan went there, and it was nowhere near the temple. The temple is a small temple. It's in like downtown Tokyo. There's no room. So it was at some kind of amphitheater. I have no idea how far away it was, but it was more in the country. So I'm going to guess miles away from where the temple was when President Kimball came out and it'll come to me, but other people, other apostles came out. And Peterson, Mark Peterson.
oh, was it really
Yeah,
Marky
he was out there.
Peterson? My
And they
goodness.
gave the dedicatory prayers, and there were multiple sessions, but it was miles away from the temple. So, yes, it doesn't make any difference where you're located. When those words are uttered, the temple is dedicated.
Well, then that means I'm guessing that there were people maybe without temple recommends that were in the temple, depending on when he would have said the prayer. Depending on,
This-
because they're cleaning. I mean, we already got the letter to the stakes in the area, right? That just starting a week from now, they've got to go in and start cleaning everything. So, yeah.
Well, the problem is if it's a week before, he dedicates the temple accidentally, and now you've got non-members going through
Yeah.
for the open house, and this temple has already been abominated. It's already the desolation of abominations before they play the tape.
Yeah. I don't know. I am not privy to any of those conversations, but interesting. And I will say the stake centers and the meeting houses that we drove past were packed as everybody was there, enjoying the dedication. So
It's nice.
yeah, that's it. So there you go. And let's see. I think all we have left then is to talk about what's coming up next week. And again, for me to remind everybody, catch that episode with Spencer Anderson. It's already happened. So you can just go into Mormon Discussions and find it. It was excellent. And I think I have a slide with my thumbnail. I think, Bill, are you adding yours?
No, I can put this back up so you can.
Yeah.
Yours.
So on Mormonish, which is always Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, we have an episode based on this amazing book. It is called, here I am merging my book club and my podcast, The Art of Living a Meaningless Existence. We have a wonderful person guest with us, Steph, who has quite an interesting story herself, but it's kind of the concept where, once you throw everything away, you strip everything down, that's when you start figuring out what means something to you and, how you can move forward. So the meaningless existence, which a lot of us are accused of having, right? When we step away from the church, it's like, oh, the scared atheist, the fearful atheist, there's no meaning in your life. Well, actually a meaningless existence is just a starting and jumping off point. So this will be interesting. What do you guys have going on through the week?
Well, Wednesday on Mormonism Live. Oh, you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill, please.
No, you. I was putting this one up first for you to say something about it.
Okay, so we recorded this incredible episode with a panel of incredible women, 7 in all, minus 1, and that's
Not
you,
me.
Rebecca. You were not there on
was not
Saturday
there.
morning when we
I had a
recorded
dental
for 4+
issue, not
hours.
there.
No, she had we mentioned it about halfway through.
Oh,
that
good.
You
Why I
had,
wasn't there.
you had an issue
had
at the dentist.
Again, yeah, it's not great.
How are you feeling?
Well, it's not great. I actually went in just to, you guys have all been following my story, having shingles and then having the tooth. It's all related, apparently. And when I went in to try to get just a simple dental implant, they instantly sent me over to a oral surgeon who looked at me and said, oh, there's something going on nerve-wise left over from the shingles. So anyway, it's an ongoing saga. We'll see what happens. Yeah. I may drop dead on the program. I don't know.
Well, if you do have to drop dead, please do it on the program.
I want to do it on the program. I think that would be huge views. And I will promise everybody that I will keep podcasting till the very end.
We would make shorts about that. Okay, so Women Speak Out. What they're addressing in an incredibly wonderful way is the chapter in Austin Fife's Light on Truth letter titled Women in the Church, where he gets absolutely everything wrong. At least according to this panel of women who know a thing or two about being a Mormon. Then Wednesday, we've got a show coming up. It's hopefully going to feature Dr. Allison Schofield, Dead Sea Scroll expert. She's a professor of Judaism with an expertise in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Denver University. I've been trying to get a hold of her, Bill, and hopefully she'll respond. She hasn't responded to my email that I sent out this morning or the text that so we're going to need to get back together about the contact information. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So
And then
anyway,
Mormonism
hopefully
After
that's
Dark.
what's going to happen, because this would be great. We're going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and Mormonism. She's not Mormon. She's never been a Mormon, but she was raised in Utah, in Provo, I think it was, right, Bill?
I don't know the details of that, but
Well, she mentioned it on the show, because we never knew about her until she calls in on last Friday night's Mormonism After Dark. And she's talking along about this, that, and the other thing. And then all of a sudden she's talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And, oh, yeah, I work on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I said, what do you mean you work on the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, I'm a professor at Denver University. And I'm going, what? And so finally, you know, I asked her what she was doing next Wednesday night. She said nothing. So I said, come on the show. Now she's, you know, I don't know. I can't get a hold of her.
I do find, you know, it's interesting. I want to use the word erudite, but you have folks who aren't even members of the church, and they are scholarly experts in their arenas, and they're tuning into Mormonism Live and Mormonism After Dark. That's a cool thing.
It really is. It really was
interesting, though, and maybe you guys have run across this on Mormonish. We've had invited several scholars to come on to talk just about their discipline. You know, it's adjacent to Mormonism. We don't even really want them to address anything in Mormonism, but we kind of, you know, want them to talk about their discipline, which any person is going to go, oh, I get it now, related to Mormonism. And we've had people say, I have friends that are Mormons. I have neighbors that are Mormons. I can't talk about my discipline because it might blow back on the beliefs of faithful Mormons. So not only is there fear among just people to try to rain on that parade, but scholars and their disciplines, which they know are going to be counter to what Mormons believe, they're reluctant in some cases to talk about it. Just professionally, they don't want to be seen as religious bigots simply by talking about the actual truth, actual information. It's interesting.
And then the only other thing I've got here, Almost Awakened, Teresa and I put out an episode, Who Am I Without Obedience, with the church woman on the left and then her more authentic self on the other side. And we go into detail about how hard it is for people that go through this process, through the dark night of the soul, and go through a period of their life where obedience is how they are valued. And then one day you decide that, having taken some of it apart, that you'd much rather be your authentic self. And sort of speaking to people on the front end of a faith journey, trying to help them have some resources and tools. So there's that as well.
And then Mormonism After Dark, still on Friday night.
By the way, Allison, if you're out there watching by any chance, okay, Radio Free More, just check your inbox, okay? Check your inbox at the university, okay? Because that's where I sent it. And I also, and check your phone, because hopefully I was using the right number when I texted you. I think that was Saturday.
So yes.
Yeah. It didn't bounce back to me. That's all I know. So
yeah, she's busy. She's a professor. She will get back to you.
I know. I'm sorry. I just get anxious.
I know. No, I get it. That sounds like an amazing episode. So
it's going to be fantastic. Right.
No, it is. I think we did it. Do you think we did it? And in under 2 hours, which is good because you guys are probably exhausted. You've been podcasting for the last 4 hours.
I am exhausted because we did it in under 2 hours.
Yep. I think
the Fairview meetings have been longer than
my gosh. Yeah. And there are more coming up. There's the zoning board meeting. I mean, I don't know. We'll have to talk about if we want to stream anything else, or if people are like, okay, you know what? We'll just hear the wrap up after the facts. It's a lot, but pretty fascinating to watch. So, all right. Well, I think we did it. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, RFM. We will catch everybody next Monday night, like clockwork, 6 p.m. with more Mormon news. Who knows what's going to happen this week? I can't even imagine.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon News.
I did not mean to do that. I was trying to.
I know. You're going to catch it. They're going to go, how dare you cut a woman off, right?
I was trying to pick the video out for it, and that happened. I'm so sorry.
It's totally okay. I'll say
go back a few steps, build it up, and sign us out. Okay, Rebecca?
That's right. I'll say thank you, everybody, and we'll see y'all next week on the Mormon Newscast.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast.